So, in this inaugural session today, we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Sanjay Jaju. Mr. Sanjay Jaju is Additional Secretary, Defense Production, Ministry of Defense, Government of India.
Yeah, so friends, it's indeed a pleasure to be talking about what our public sectors should be doing, uh, not just in uh, enhancing the growth for the country, but at the same time to be competitive and play a role on par with the private sector, especially in a situation where you have globalization, you have competitiveness, which actually drives enterprises in the world. Coming to the public sector, in the defense production, we have our own share of public sectors. We have 9 public sector companies, and now we have created 7 more companies. So possibly 16 public sector companies in the defense production. And uh, all of you would know that defense has traditionally been a public sector centric production organization. Only recently, it's about 20 years now that the private sector has been allowed entry into defense, and now we have a fairly good and a robust ecosystem of both public and private sectors collaborating to create the defense production and meet the requirements of our armed forces. Now, as we have many other public sector companies represented in this summit, I would like to defocus myself from the defense side and talk about the public sectors, having myself been part of many of them. In fact, we could create the National Highways and Infrastructure Development Corporation. It's a public sector company that was created. And if you look at the trajectory, somebody would argue, why did we create that company? So the simple reason could be that a public sector or a company or corporate environment provides us the flexibility, the agility that is required to run a business. An example of that is now can be seen in the Defense Production Department, where a 200-year-old enterprise called as the Ordnance Factory Board has now been corporatized, and we have converted 41 factories into 7 public sector new companies. And the paradigm for that, or the preamble for creating these companies, was to bring in efficiency, autonomy, and accountability in the functioning of these factories. And how is it achieved? First comes the accountability question. Now, when you become a company, then obviously you have transparent accounting. You know what is coming in, what is going out. At the end of the day, it's not that you're drawing money from the consolidated funds of India and without any relationship to the revenues that you earn. You keep drawing the money from the consolidated funds. So when a department becomes a company, which in this case the ordnance factories have, you actually know what you're earning, what you're spending. So at the end of the financial year, you know what has been your output into the system, what has been the profit that you have generated for your shareholders. So that brings the accountability part. So you're accountable to your shareholders, you're accountable to the owners, and at the end of the day, you are supposed to provide them returns on the investments that they have made in the enterprise. Autonomy, because when you run a government department is designed for non-business operations. And as they rightly say, it's not the business of the government to do business. So if there is a business that's happening, it's better done in a corporate environment, and that's how a public sector company gets created. And when I say efficiency, and that is where I intend to talk about now, because it's not as if by merely corporatizing or by creating a corporate enterprise, you would be able to achieve the efficiency that is desired efficiency and productivity of the resources that you consume from your shareholders. And that's where you also find a lot of the public sector companies created earlier in the past, languishing right now, not generating returns for their shareholders. And I think that is where it's very important that all those who are in the public sector try and understand that the future would always be made only by those companies that create value for their shareholders, which in this case is the government. So it's important that we improve the operations of the company. We have a well laid out vision for our companies. And based on that vision, we should be able to not just improve the internal functioning of our organizations by bringing in the efficiencies that are there in the functioning of any private sector company that works, and at the same time also create a growth path for ourselves by tapping in better and bigger markets. In fact, there's another aspect to how a private sector is able to bring in better returns for its shareholders, is also because of the productivity in various factors of production. I could give you a simple example of an IT company and the small floor space that they occupy and the production that they generate, and compare it with, say, a huge public sector companies with a lot of townships and stuff, but effectively the kind of value that is generated is not adequate enough to please the shareholders. You have examples of many uh, brick and mortar, even public sector enterprises that are not generating enough value for their shareholders in comparison to the the new age, new technology startups and companies that are creating value for their shareholders and able to generate uh, profits and productivity and provide optimism for future growth and future earnings to their shareholders. So it's important that all our public sectors start understanding their role in the segment. Although there is a lot of strategic disinvestment happening in the country, privatization also happening in the country, and I think going forward, we'll be seeing more and more companies, even public sector companies, adopting that particular route. But what is important is for us to understand that it's the presence or a healthy presence of the public and the private sector that would be very important and fundamental to the growth of our country. Because monopoly on both sides is going to be another great thing for our economy, and a market friendly and a company that's competing in the market, be it in the public or the private sector, would not just be important for its shareholders, but it would also be important for the consumers of the goods and services, and that eventually will be very important for the economic growth in our country. So it's good that today's discussions are being centered around, I understand, technology, capacity building, the reskilling of the employees. Very important because most of the companies are in a dynamic flux right now. The world is changing more so with the pandemic around, and I'm absolutely sure the infusion of technology, the very fact that we are conducting this conference in this virtual format, exemplifies that technology is going to play a very important role. If it's not playing, and it started to play a very important role, not just in the growth of enterprises, but I think the very fact, very way in which we live and lead our lives. So it's important that technology comes at the forefront, and it's also important that our public sectors embrace it, because that only is going to improve their value in the system, and that only will ensure the returns to their shareholders. So my best wishes and congratulations to the organizers for having me here. And my apologies that I would have to leave now because I have another schedule. But I will definitely be going to the uh, the program uh, uh, later on to understand the gains that came out of the summit today. So once again, my congratulations to the entire Elets team and best wishes for the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay ji, for your encouragement and you highlighted the importance of IT in this dynamic environment which is happening all over the world. And uh, we are going to provide you a report of the all the session outcomes. Thank you so much. Namaskar.